We're joined today by Jeff Halperin, the Chief Compliance Officer at AmeriLife, who is a graduate of the University of Michigan. Myself, as a graduate of Michigan State University. There's going to be a little bit of a rivalry there, but I promise I'm not going to let it intrude into the questions. So with that in mind, Jeff, first question. AmeriLife, unlike the University of Michigan football program, takes compliance seriously. How are you going to keep cheating out of our system?
Oh, my God!
Wow. I don't know. I think you're just jealous of the winningness of the program.
Got him.
Hail, hail, Michigan. They are the champions.
And we will continue to win in spite of all of the changes at Michigan. And we'll continue to win here at AmeriLife.
That's right.
With a compliant-oriented annual enrollment period coming up.
The real challenge isn't production anymore.
Where in the content creation process should the human element remain non-negotiable?
But has the bar for what makes content effective just gotten higher for everyone?
Practical tools that make our marketing smarter and our operations more effective. Welcome to Marketing Masterminds. We're joined this time by Jeff Halperin, our Chief Compliance Officer at AmeriLife. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Bill. Good to be with you.
Yes, welcome, Jeff. Exciting
Thanks,
times
Jeff.
here as we're heading into AEP. So we know AEP is one of the busiest times of the year when it comes to marketing and getting ready for the season ahead. And I think a lot of the times our agents out there feel like it's compliances that has to. Everyone knows you have to get it done. But I think sometimes they miss that advantage that they could get out of making sure they're compliant. So let's start there if we're good. And what are those advantages of how compliance can help as they're heading into the AEP season?
Yeah, I mean, I think, compliance is maybe I'll say a necessary evil of the business, right? The Medicare Advantage space is highly regulated. It's highly regulated because it's dealing with sales to a vulnerable part of the population. So the government, the regulators are concerned that that segment of the population isn't taken advantage of and isn't subjected to high-pressure sales tactics. So there are lots of rules to make sure that they're treated fairly and appropriately. And I think, it's our responsibility to make sure that we, put these seniors in products that will, benefit them and their medical needs.
Absolutely.
In terms of it being an advantage, one thing that we're seeing in our business is a shift from volume to quality. And when people ask me that question, how do we effectively make the shift from volume to quality? The first thing I always say is that compliant business is quality business. And ultimately, it's going to benefit your book of business because you're going to have people who effectuate at a higher rate and who stick with you longer if you start them out the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at my notes here, and I wrote, create a sustainable business, right? If you, I think, do the sales process the right way, you'll minimize complaints, you'll have satisfied customers, they'll refer you to other potential prospects, and it creates, a virtuous cycle. If you cut corners, don't do business with reputable folks, we've seen that lead to more customer complaints, dissatisfaction, rapid disenrollment, and then, it becomes a vicious cycle in the wrong way. Carrier scrutiny, continuous audits, and now you're distracted from the sales process by having to respond to these requests that take up your time rather than, being productive in the sales environment.
Absolutely. It takes you away from what you're supposed to be doing at your core, which is helping people when you have to go back and answer these questions. Now, I call this a process very similar to doing your taxes every year, right? Mm-hmm. There's this complex government-sponsored type of process that you need to navigate through every year in the case of your taxes. And if you're a Medicare agent, it's the AEP and CMS compliance. What do agents generally, in your experience, find most confusing about the process?
I don't know about what's most confusing, but I'll highlight a couple of areas that people should be mindful of. One, since we're talking about marketing, I'd say kind of the distinction between communication and marketing in the CMS regulations, right? Communication is the broader concept of really any communication related to a Medicare product. But then there's a special category within communication that's deemed a marketing piece, and that piece is going to have content and intent, right? So there's going to be information about the benefits, specific benefits of the product, and sort of a call to action, right, to drive someone, excuse me, to purchase the product, right? And marketing material needs to be filed with carriers and filed with CMS. And I think that, understanding the distinction, making sure if you don't want your material to have to be filed, you keep it more generic, and understand that if you want your material to be specific and talk about the various benefits that are available, then you need to build time into your process to file it, get it approved, and make sure that all your ducks are in a row.
There's a very interesting synergy between what Jeff just said and what you and David specialize at AmeriLife Marketing Mentors. Because when we talk about communication versus marketing, a big part of the communication flow can be that personal brand building that you talk about all the time, right?
And the education. So it's the education of it, not just going after the sale or the sales message. It's that education, and that comes in key when you're talking about the messaging that you put out there and teaching, not necessarily going for the sales messaging.
That's right. So if you're an agent out there and you're struggling to navigate that line between what is communication, what is marketing, building up your own personal brand and being out there as an advisor and an educator and a resource in the community, whether it's online or whether you go out into the community and actually do it person to person, that's a great way to have a communication message that is an extraordinarily effective way to build the kind of book that does survive the quality tests that we all need to be surviving these days.
Absolutely, and it's your personality that sets you apart from everybody else
right.
that's saying those same type of messages. And I'm sure you guys see that a lot, with the things that are submitted or come through for the compliance. So speaking of that and the communication and the education, and I know we were talking a little bit about the confusion that the agents feel during these times. There's a couple of things that have happened over the last year or two that have changed a little bit. That have caused a little bit of confusion or maybe just unknown of what's coming ahead. Can we talk a little bit about the details of what's changed or what's coming up this AEP for them?
I guess, the first one we'll highlight is the scope of appointment change. So prior to plan year 2027, which will be the AEP starting in October of this year, there was a requirement that the scope of appointment generally, and in most cases, had to be obtained 48 hours prior to a personal marketing appointment, right? And that gave beneficiaries maybe a cooling off period, and make sure they wanted to have that appointment and gave them 2 days to think about it. But it also created some inconveniences because if they wanted to meet with the agent right then and there, they couldn't. They'd have to say, "Oh, we'll have to schedule this for 2 days in advance," and I think the regulators realized that the costs were outweighing the benefits of the 48-hour kind of waiting period rule. So starting in the plan year 2027, the scope of appointment can be obtained simultaneously with the personal marketing appointment. So you need to fill out the scope, complete it, retain it. All those components still exist, but you don't have to wait 48 hours before having a marketing session.
Yeah, that rule caused considerable confusion as well because the way it was written, it didn't account for certain scenarios. It didn't account, for example, for an inbound call. It was if there's an inbound walk-in, if somebody came to somebody's office, there was a provision for that. You could take that appointment if they did that. But if somebody called you, the rule was very vague about what that was, and we went through a number of carrier interpretations and compliance interpretations of that and worked out a viable system. But a lot of unnecessary work there that has now gone away as a result of what I think is a wise revision to the rule.
Yeah, and we'll see. I think it's important that beneficiaries understand the products that they're going to be presented during a meeting, and I think it's a worthwhile exercise. But you don't see a lot of necessarily abuses. To me, the abuse comes in the potential comes in the actual sales presentation, right? Or if the way things are presented are not presented. So it'll I think allow us to focus on making sure that the sales presentation is is fair, balanced, and appropriate for the beneficiary.
And I would add on to that complete, because there's a couple of different ways that you can be non-compliant. You can be deliberately non-compliant. We see very few examples of that. But sometimes we do see non-compliance because of the non-completeness of the process, meaning they haven't gone through all of the aspects of the required process in order to fully educate that beneficiary so they can make an informed choice that's best for them. Do you have anything to add to that?
And maybe one area where we see that, and we've been seeing it of late, is in the telesales area with scripts. So you need to make sure that you have an approved script. The script needs to be approved by the carriers, and it needs to be current for the plan year. And it really applies to any enrollment that you're doing on the telephone. So it's not just in a call center. It's if you're on the phone doing an enrollment, you have to follow a script. And I think there's been some confusion there, and we've put out some communications recently to clarify that. But if you're on the phone, use a script, make sure it's current, make sure it's approved, and that will avoid a lot of headaches in the future.
Yeah, small plug for LeadStar here. We work with our compliance team to make sure that we have a carrier and compliance approved script that we can provide exclusively for LeadStar agents. And I know that Megan and the team over at LeadStar is working on that right now.
I was just thinking about that a second ago when you were talking about all the work that you guys did to make sure that you were compliant, and you went through all of the jumps and the hurdles to ensure that with the LeadStar platform. And now it's extra safe as these new rules roll out, but it just goes to prove if you do the due diligence, you can still get it all done. And it's great to have partners like LeadStar that we know are doing that due diligence and making sure everyone's safe with
I
it.
appreciate that, Joe. And the one thing I would say to the agents who are watching this and to the marketers that are advising them, just because you have a script doesn't mean that parts of that script are optional or skippable. I think that's another thing that we see is they've got a script that says, okay, in these sections, I don't want to deviate from the script. The idea of the script is you not only don't deviate from what's put there, but that you go through each section carefully to make sure that you're covering the entirety of the enrollment process as CMS has designed it.
And speaking of scripts, you almost have to talk about AI at this point, because we know
100%.
when you're talking about scripts and you're talking about content and the creation of it and trying to get, from an agent's perspective, they're trying to be more effective. And so we know, just like anything else, AI is going to play a role in this. So what advice do you have for those that want to utilize AI to make sure that they're remaining compliant, or how can they utilize AI to make themselves more efficient, but not stepping outside of those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI can help you not start with a blank sheet of paper, right? I think that certainly that I've been using it that way just to give me a head start. But then I think the human element needs to take over, review it, make sure it's saying things exactly the way you want it to, and then still, because we operate in this regulated environment, you still need to submit it for approval, both with the carriers and with CMS. So there's no AI substitute for that. And then the flip side that I'll say, building on Bill's point, which was an excellent one, which is now that AI tools are being used in the audit space, it's allowing carriers and FMOs, frankly, to review many more calls, because they're AI tools that will listen to these calls more quickly and identify those deficiencies where sections are skipped or language isn't read as it should have been read. So there's more scrutiny and more potential for carrier and FMO feedback. So all the more reason to make sure you're using good scripts and reading them as they're written.
Absolutely.
That's an incredible point when you think about it, because from our perspective, or at least mine, I always look at it from the agent's perspective of being more efficient.
Well, you're an agent, so that makes sense.
Exactly. So then when you think about it, though, you're like, oh, wow, they can review that much more, that much quicker, and you're going to catch things that were in the market that they may not have necessarily caught before. And so there's that extra layer of review on top. It's pretty interesting when you think about it from that perspective.
We're still working with our vendor to fine tune things, but it's going to allow us to, review many more calls and also get us to focus on, the areas more quickly, right, than having a human, listen to the calls and identify things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point you made is a point that we all very firmly believe in. I just want to reemphasize it. AI is great for drafting, but when it comes to editing and actually giving the final sign-off, there is no substitute now or I believe on the horizon for a human being in that loop and making those decisions. Yeah. So here we are. This is going to come out right around the second week in August, and we're looking at AEP approaching very quickly, only 70 or more so days left to go. What should licensed agents and marketing teams be doing right now to make sure that when they're ready to go and start selling on October 15th, that they are keeping compliance top of mind and doing it the right way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of what we've talked about, which is, if you're going to be on the phone, get that script filed, make sure you know what you're going to use, make sure it's up to date. That's number one. And same thing with your marketing and communications. How are you going to go to market? What are you communicating? Does it meet the definition of marketing under the CMS rules? If so, have you filed it, for approval with your upline so that they can get carrier approval, CMS filing, and then you'll have your SMID or, marketing identification number to put on that piece. So I think those are two really important aspects that will set you up for, success under the rules in October.
That was meant to be a closing question, but you brought up SMIDs. So yeah. I do want to get your perspective on something that I think people find confusing sometimes. And that is because a piece, let's say from a lead vendor, for example, has an SMID on it, they believe that means it's approved for their use, perhaps outside of the scope of where that SMID was issued. Can you talk a little bit about how that's not a great practice?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So, I guess I might call it cloned material, or if you're using a piece that was approved through another distribution channel, that may mean that the piece is likely going to be approved without issue because it does have that number. But we have to go through our own process for our distribution channel, and we will put our version of an SMID number on it, put it through the same process, and get it back so that you can use it appropriately. It's certainly I think potentially confusing. One would think, gee, if the carrier's already approved it, it has this number, why can't I use it? But the rules aren't set up that way. It's something that we think about talking to CMS about in the future, because there should be an easier way. It seems kind of duplicative, but the way the rules work today, we need to sort of go through our own process.
And it's important to follow the rules as they are today, not the way we think they should be, and hopefully will be in the future.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to that better safe than sorry. Make sure you get them both reviewed and get the correct approvals. And we're right. We're 70-some days away, and time to start getting working and making sure you're getting all those approvals, knowing that, especially from the carrier's perspective, it could take a little bit of time.
Yeah, and for our distribution network, we've been putting out many communications, on these very topics. So, whether it's this SMID question or how things should get approved and what the difference is between marketing and communication. So we try to get the word out there to our network, and then we were just talking earlier before we went on camera about the new marketing review system that we have in place here at AmeriLife. So we're excited that we're going to have some technology to help us move pieces around and be a little more efficient. So we are ready to partner with everyone in our distribution network.
Absolutely. Take the time now to review and understand those communications. It'll save you a lot of time and trouble down the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like we covered some really important topics, and definitely heading into AEP, these topics are critical for them to know to stay compliant and make sure that everyone's on the right path. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.